Hi and welcome to class 14 of my intermediate level course, and today we're going to be looking at let me just check the sound. Always a bit disconcerting at the beginning because you don't know if it's working, but now I can see that it's working. Today we're going to be looking at should, must and have to. Three words that we can use to make recommendations or obligation or non-necessity I should say. Before we begin, let's have a look and see who we have in the chat. We've got Marcela from Buenos Aires, we've got Javier Caron, we've got Sonia, we've got Anna from Spain, we've got another Anna, I think, no, it's the same Anna, sorry, Viviana from Buenos Aires, a lot of people from Argentina today. We've got Vero, we've got Fabi, we've got somebody from Colombia, Melissa from Mexico, Vanny from Chile, and Jorge from Chile. Okay, let's begin the class. Today we're going to be looking at should, have to. Let's put this down here. Wait a minute, and make it the right aspect. About there, I think. I think it's better at the bottom of the screen. In the last class I put it at the bottom and it's in better. Now I can't get to my pages here, hold on. Page 1, let's have a look. Yeah, let's begin here. So yeah, today we are going to be looking at should. So we're going to be looking at should, which is should is what we call a modal verb. So the first word we'll be looking at today is should. Should. We'll also be looking at must. These two words are what we call modal verbs. Modal verbs. Modal verbs. So let's make this text a bit bigger, I think. Yeah, this is what we're going to be looking at today. Modal verbs should and must. So modal verbs are special auxiliary verbs. I think we did cover both of these verbs, modal verbs, in level A2, which was lower intermediate. We already looked at these two. So modal verbs are special auxiliary verbs, and down here I have some examples that we'll look at in a minute. The other thing we're going to be looking at today is have to. Let me put that in another box, because have to is not a modal verb. Have to is not a modal verb. But we'll also be looking at have to, and it's not a modal verb, but it acts like a modal verb. Hold on a minute. Let me just, somebody in the chat is being a nuisance, so goodbye. If you can't respect other people, don't come to the class. So the next one is have to. Modal, sorry, I got distracted. Have to is not a modal verb, but it behaves like a modal verb. It behaves like a modal verb. So it's included here because we use it to talk about obligation. So to begin, hi Sergio, hi Rene. To begin, here I have some examples using should and have to and must or mustn't, sometimes in the positive, sometimes in the negative. Let's make this a bit bigger and let's highlight the examples that I have here. The examples. Let's highlight the examples. First of all, we have should do. Should do. Then we have to wear. Have to wear. And then we have a negative, mustn't smoke. Mustn't smoke. And then we have don't have to get. A negative using have to. Hi Franklin. Next we have negative with should, shouldn't. You shouldn't use. So, as I said earlier, should and must, I didn't put a positive example of must here, but should and must are used, this is negative, are modal verbs. So modal verbs are always the same. Modal verbs change the feeling of the main verb. Here we have the main verb is do. Do your English homework. So by adding should, we are changing the feeling. If I say do your English homework without the should, just do your English homework, that is what we call the imperative. That's just like a command. And if I say you do your English homework, that's present simple tense. That's just a statement of fact. But if by adding the should in front of the do, I change the feeling of this verb. You should do your English homework. So this is a modal verb, and must is also a modal verb. Now we've seen other modal verbs. We've seen these verbs before, these modal verbs before. And we've also seen other modal verbs. For example, we saw can. I can speak English is another modal verb. So the thing to remember with modal verbs, all the modal verbs, and there are others, should, must, will. Will is another modal verb that we saw before. Can, may, might. All of those, they are always followed by the base verb. Never, ever, ever after a modal verb do you want to put here to. Should to do, this is wrong. We don't want to put to here, never. After any modal verb, we don't want to put to there. It's incorrect. This is a mistake that some people make. It doesn't matter what modal verb it is, it's always followed by the base form of the verb. It's always followed by the base form of the verb. So, now the other thing that we have here is have to. Now have to is not a modal verb, but it functions in the same way because it is used to change the feeling of the main verb. So here obviously have to is followed by the base verb, but obviously here we have the to. It's have to plus the base verb. You have to wear a seatbelt in the UK. So what is the meaning of these modal verbs, or these auxiliary verbs, we should call them? What is the meaning of these expressions? Here I have some statements. Let me read the statements again, first of all. The first one is, you should do your English homework. You should do your English homework. The next one, you have to wear a seatbelt in the United Kingdom. This here is UK, it's United Kingdom. That's the country in Europe where they speak English. You have to wear a seatbelt in the UK. You mustn't smoke on the plane. You mustn't smoke on the plane. Mexicans don't have to get a visa to travel to the EU. Mexicans don't have to get a visa to travel to the EU. Now, if you are a Spanish speaker, don't get confused about EU. This is English, not Spanish. And the EU means, in English, the European Union. So if a Mexican person travels to the European Union, they don't need a visa. If a Mexican travels to the United States, we would have to change that in English. It would say Mexicans have to get a visa to travel to the US, United States. Remember, in English is different from other languages like Spanish. If we say EU in English is European Union. In United States in English is US. So let's carry on. We have one more example here. Oh, sorry, I forgot you can't see that. Let's move it over there. You just check the chats. Okay, the last example that I had here was you shouldn't use your mobile phone when you're driving. You shouldn't use your mobile phone when you're driving. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 examples here, and over here in this box here, let's make that bigger. Let's make that bigger. I think I'll have to get rid of this European Union bit. Remember, EU is European Union because it's getting in the way now. Just take that off. Let's move that up there. I can go up there. And let's move this one down here, because what we need to do is, let's make this bigger. What we need to do is match these are the meanings. We need to match these with these are the uses. Yeah, we need to match these with the sentences up here. So you should do your English homework. What does it mean? Does it mean you don't need to do this? It isn't necessary. Does it mean don't do this? It isn't allowed or it isn't permitted. Does it mean do this because it's a rule or it's the law or a law? Does it mean I think it's a bad idea to do this? Or does it mean I think it's a good idea to do this? What is the meaning of this first sentence? You should do your English homework. You should do your English homework. Rene Kanya says the last one. Yeah, very good. If I say you should do your English homework, what that means is I think it's a good idea for you to do this. I think it's a good idea. Using the modal verb should is like making a recommendation, making a suggestion, or giving advice. Giving advice. So the first answer is that there. I think it's a good idea to do this. Let's make that right across the board. When we use should, it's like making a recommendation. Number two. Well, they don't have numbers, but the second one. You have to wear a seatbelt in the UK. You have to wear a seatbelt in the United Kingdom. And Minklis and Melissa and Rene do this because it's a rule or a law. Yeah, very good, very good. If you, let's just check something a minute. Do this because it's a rule or it's a law. Let's just copy that one over there. Do this. This is the correct answer here. We're going to grab that there and we're going to paste it up here. And we'll make it blue. So when we say have to, you have to, it's a rule, it's a law, it's an obligation. It's an obligation. Obligation. And this one here is like advice or a suggestion. So when we use, here what we're doing here is trying to deduce the rules. When we use should in English, should is like advice, it's like a suggestion. When we say have to in English, it's an obligation, it's a law, it's a rule. What about the next one? You mustn't smoke on the plane. You mustn't smoke on the plane. Joseph Delpin says the second one. Rene says the second one. Melissa says it's a bad idea. No, that's not correct. Fabi says number 3 because it's a rule or a law. No, the correct answer is Joseph and Rene and Minklis. The correct answer here is you mustn't smoke on the plane is number 2. Don't do this. It's not allowed. It's not permitted to do this. So we're going to put that one there and we're going to make it blue. It's prohibited. It's prohibited. It's prohibited to smoke on the plane. When we say you mustn't smoke on the plane, we mean it's prohibited. This is prohibition. Prohibition. Good. The next one then is Mexicans don't have to get a visa to travel to the EU. Mexicans don't have to get a visa to travel to the EU. The first one, yeah, this is the first one. Good. You don't need to do this. Oh, I didn't want to do that. Control C. Now this, in a minute we'll look some more of this grammar, but basically, let's see if I can move this right across here. It's not necessary. Now, when we say you don't have to, it means it's not necessary. If a Mexican travels to the to the European Union, they don't have to get a visa. They can get, it is possible to obtain a visa, but it is not necessary. It is not necessary. Hold on, I just wanted to check something. So the last one, you shouldn't use your mobile phone while driving. You shouldn't use your mobile phone while driving. Is the fourth one. 1, 2, 3, is it? Yeah, good. This is the opposite of what we saw earlier. So it's similar to the first one we saw, but this time it's in the negative. It's in the negative. So basically, let's go through them again then. So the first one we saw is the modal should. When we say should, you should do your English homework. What we mean is like it's a good, I think it's a good idea. It's advice. It's a suggestion. It's a recommendation. You should do your English homework. You have to wear a seatbelt in the UK. It's a law. It's an obligation. You mustn't smoke on the plane. Don't do this. It is not allowed. It isn't allowed. It's not permitted. It's prohibited. Mexicans don't have to get a visa. Here we're using have to in the negative. It means it's not necessary for a Mexican to get or to obtain a visa if they travel to the European Union. You don't need to do it. You can if you want, but it's not necessary. And finally, you shouldn't use your mobile phone when you're driving. I think it's a bad idea. This is like the first one, you should. This is I think it's a good idea. It's advice. This one is also advice, but it's like negative advice. I'm telling you, you shouldn't do something. This one I'm telling you, you should. I recommend that you do this. I recommend that you don't do this. Very good. Let's continue on the next page and look at the rules in more detail. So here we have on this page, let's make this bigger first of all. Remember, if the text is blurry, then change your settings. Make sure you're watching the video high definition. Sometimes people complain that they can't see. I think I can get this on here. No, it's covered by my video. So let's move some of these. We're going to move some of these because I'm not using these at the moment, so that I can get this over here. Let's move that over there. And let's move this up here. Let's make sure everybody can see it. So the first thing that we looked at today is obligation. I don't know if I can make that bigger. Probably, yeah, I think I can get away with that. Obligation is the first thing. Obligation. So to talk about obligation, we have two ways of talking about obligation. We can either use the modal verb must, or we can use have to. Two choices. There's a slight difference between the use of these two. Normally we use must for specific one occasion or personal obligations, and we use have to, hold on, let me just highlight that. We use have to for, somewhere on here actually there's a highlighter which I never used before. We use have to for more general obligations, rules and laws. So here I have some examples to explain the difference. Both of these are used for obligation. But I have to go to work now. Here I say have to because the reason I have to go to work is because the company tells me that I need to be able to work at 8 o'clock, let's say. So it's an external rule. It's not something that comes from my feelings. I have to go to work now. The example that we saw on the previous page was you have to wear a seatbelt. It's a law. It's a law. It's external. And the example with must here is, let me get that highlighter again. The example here we have to go to work, and here we have must go. The example here with must is just like, for example, if you're talking to a friend and you look at your watch and you say, oh, is that the time I must go? I must go. Is that the time I must go? You want to end the conversation. Because it's something that I feel. Nothing externally is forcing me to go. There's no external obligation, but I feel the obligation that I should go. Another example with must is I must phone my friend. Again, as something that I feel. There's no law that says I need to phone my friend, but I feel that I should because I haven't spoken to my friend for a long time. And the last one we have is he has to work tomorrow. Notice here we are using, he. So when we have he with have to, we need to use has to. He has to work early tomorrow. Again, this is because the company, it's an external rule. So must and have to, both of these can be used for obligation. But must is more used for personal obligations, specific one occasion obligations, and have to for rules and laws and external obligations. This is a small, in a real world situation, probably if you say I must go to work tomorrow or I have to go to work tomorrow, it's better to say I have to, but if in a real world situation, if you said I must go to work tomorrow, people would understand you. because they both really mean the same thing, obligation. This is just a little rule, a little difference between the two of them. Now remember, must is a modal verb, and because it's a modal verb, it only exists in the present. So in any situation, whether it's a personal situation like this one here where we use must in the present, or a specific situation in the past of must is always had to. We don't have a past of must. So if we want to talk about obligation in the past, we had to say, I had to get up early yesterday, irrespective of whether it was an external rule or something personal, because we cannot put must in the past. And actually that applies for all the tenses. We can't, there's no future. If we want to do the future, we're going to need to say, I'm going to have to go to work tomorrow, or I will have to go to work tomorrow. In the future of must or have to would be, I'm going to have to go, or we could also say, I will have to go, depending on the situation. The future we covered in another class. So if you're going to talk in, the thing to remember here is that have to exists in all tenses, but must only exists in the present tense. And also for questions. You can use must in questions, but it's not normally used now. For example, the question would be, do you have to go to work on Saturday? Do you have to go is a question. Now it is possible also to say, must you go? But I personally would not use that expression. Must you go would be like a very formal question. I don't think most native speakers now use that form. Most people now would say, in any situation would say, do you have to go? Do you have to go? Or maybe they would, another thing people you may hear would be, have you got, maybe I should have mentioned that too. Have you got to go? Is probably what I would say. Maybe that's a little bit more colloquial. Probably that would be more common in Britain. But while I'm on that subject, I should mention that an alternative to have to is have you got, or I have got. An alternative that you would hear in the real world would be I have got to go, or with the contraction, I've got to go now. That's all. It means exactly the same as I have to go now. They mean the same thing. So this is another structure that we can use using have got to, which is the same as have to. And you would probably hear that more commonly, especially in Britain, in the United Kingdom. Maybe less common in the USA. And that is to do, and probably I should do another class on that, a separate class, because that is to do with the use of have got and have to, which can be used for possession, but that's another subject. But if people say to you, I've got to go now, or you probably in the real world you would hear, I've got to go now. I've got to go now. That's the way a lot of natives speak. I've got to go now. It's exactly the same as saying, I have to go now. These two are synonymous. I've got to go now, I've got to go now, I have to go now, I have to go now. Well, the last two are the same. All of those are synonymous. In the question, people might say, have you got to go? Now remember, I'm writing this the way it's going to be spoken. You don't write it like that. The correct way to write it is, have you got to go? But people don't necessarily say that. They say, have you got to go now? Have you got to go now? So those are the questions. We could ask the questions in three ways. Have you got to go? Or Probably in the USA, you're more likely hear, do you have to go? But I've gone off the subject a bit. It just occurred to me when I was explaining this. So must, back to the main theme here, must only exists in the present. For questions, use do you have to or have you got to. Another use that I added on the bottom here on written notices. Quite often on if you're in a place and you see a written notice, it's more likely to use must than have to. Must is normally used on written notices. For example, hard hats must be worn. This is a notice that you may see in a factory or on a building site, on a construction site, where people have to wear a hard hat for protection. Hard hats must be worn. This here actually is in the passive voice. Must plus be plus the past participle. That's another subject. I think I covered that, the passive, in another class. But probably in this we'll cover it too. So I'm running out of space here a bit. Let's just move some of this stuff out the way that we're not using. First of all, I need to zoom out a bit. Let's move these out the way. And let's have a look at, so let's move that over there. We need to look at these ones here. So to carry on with the class, yeah, maybe I should move that one out the way too, but I can just move this page over here. Let's erase all these. So what else did we look at? We looked at should and we looked at don't have to. So let's have a look first of all then at these here. So the first one I think we'll look at is this one here. Hold on, let me just move that out because it's very annoying. That thing there's distracting me. Let's move that out there. That's better. Yeah, so the negative of have to, is don't have to. Don't have to. So don't have to is actually very different from have to, because we saw that have to, I have to go means it's an obligation. But when we say I don't have to go, that means it's not necessary to go. I can if I want, but if I don't want to, it's not necessary. For example, you don't have to pay for this class, it's free. It's not necessary to pay. And you don't have to do any homework either. It's not necessary. Maybe it's a good idea to do homework. I could say you should do homework, but you don't have to. It's not necessary. So the negative of have to is don't have to, but the meaning is different. The meaning of have to, I have to go, is an obligation. The meaning of don't have to means it's not necessary. And the negative of must, remember in the positive, we saw earlier, we saw you must go, you have to go, and we saw you must go. Those two are very similar. We saw there's a little bit of a difference. We saw that have to is more for external obligation and must is more for internal obligation. But if you say I have to go, I must go, it has the same meaning. But in the negative of you have to go is you don't have to go, and that means it's not necessary. But the negative of must is you mustn't go. That means it's prohibited. You can't do, you mustn't do it. It's prohibited. It's against the law. So there's in the positive, you have to go and you must go are very similar, but in the negative, they are very different. Here I've got some more examples. For example, we already saw these two. You don't have to pay for this class. If you want to pay for this class, you can. You can pay in the super chat there. I think one time one person did pay, but normally people don't pay. You don't have to do any homework. And prohibition. You mustn't touch that high voltage cable. It's prohibited. Plus, it would probably be very stupid to touch it because you could get a electric shock and die. You mustn't, here I made a mistake, sorry, this should just have one verb here. I probably changed my mind about that. You mustn't walk on the grass. It's prohibited to walk on the grass. You mustn't smoke on the plane. It's prohibited to smoke on the plane. So remember, let's before we remember, let's look at the other one that I've got down here, which is comparing the two. Look at the difference between these two. You mustn't drive there. It's a pedestrian area. That means it's prohibited to drive in that zone or that area. And the other one, you don't have to drive, you can take the bus. That means it's not necessary for you to drive, but if you want to, you can, but if not, okay, take the bus. So in the positive, very similar, you have to go, you must go, more or less the same meaning, but in the negative, very different. Non-necessity, don't have to, and prohibition, mustn't. Mustn't, of course, too, is the contraction of must not, but nobody says must not. You must not go. We say you mustn't go. You mustn't touch. Good. So the last modal verb that we saw today was should. So we saw earlier at the beginning of class that you can use should for suggestions. You can use should for suggestions. So use should for suggestions, recommendations and advice. Use should for suggestions, recommendations and advice. For example, this is a little conversation. A says, I'm going to Russia. And B says, you should take some warm clothes. It might be cold. Here's a mistake because it should say it might be cold. This is another modal verb. It's another subject, but this is another modal verb. Might means probability, not probability, possibility. Possibility. It might be cold. You should, but we're not covering this modal verb today, but it's another modal verb. Let me just check 1 second my chat. So you should take some warm clothes. It might be cold. I think the government should do something about the traffic. Should do something. This is an opinion actually, but again, I think it would be a good idea for the government to do something about this traffic. In the negative, you shouldn't eat a lot of sugar. You know, it's my opinion, it's a recommendation, it's advice. Finally, recommending a film. You should see that film, or you should see that movie. In English, in British English we say film, in American English they say movie. Maybe I should say you should watch that film. You should watch that film. Yeah, it's better to use watch. You can use either actually in this situation. You should watch that film. It's very good. So this is a recommendation. We saw earlier that we can use must. Must is for obligations. But you can also say something like this: you must watch that movie or that film. It's fantastic. Here I'm using, obviously this is not an obligation, as we saw earlier with must, but we can also use must to make recommendations. So I think that's covered everything on those. Let's have a look at the next page. We've got some questions. So let's zoom in a bit, and we start with these ones here. So circle the correct form. Well, we're not going to circle the correct form. Choose the correct form here. Choose the correct form. So write in the chat, we mustn't, or we don't have to hurry. We have plenty of time. Which is the correct form here? Mustn't or don't have to? And already we have Renee with the correct answer. Yeah, obviously the correct answer is don't have to is the correct answer. And this one here is the wrong answer. We don't have to hurry. We have plenty of time. It's not necessary to hurry. If you say we mustn't hurry, it means it's prohibited to hurry. Number two, you must remember to write the report. The boss will be furious if you forget, or you should remember to write the report. And again, Renee has the correct answer, which is must. Here we need to use must. We don't want to use should, because should is a recommendation. But here you must, it's an obligation, because if not, then your boss will be furious. Number three, the exhibition was free, so I hadn't to or didn't have to pay. The exhibition was free. Plenty, what is it? Plenty means a lot of. Plenty means a lot of, Jorge. Plenty of time means a lot of time. A lot of time. So which one are we on? We're on number 3. Hadn't to. No, that is actually the wrong answer. Remember, hadn't to doesn't actually exist. I mean, if it was past negative, we would say this one here, didn't have to. The past negative of have to is didn't have to. So this one here is wrong, and the right one is this one here, didn't have to pay. It wasn't necessary. It wasn't necessary to pay. Number 4. Do you have to or should you wear a uniform at your school? Do you have to or should you wear a uniform at your school? Do you have to or should you wear a uniform at your school? Have to, do you have to? Yeah, very good. It's a, this one is wrong. It's not asking about a recommendation, it's asking about obligation in your school. So we need to say, do you have to? Do you have to? Do you have to wear a uniform at your school? Number 5, we must or we had to wait for 2 hours at security and nearly missed our flight. Which is correct? We must wait 2 hours or we had to wait 2 hours? Must, says Graciela. Jorge, we had to. We had to is the correct answer. This is in the past. This is in the past. Remember, must, we can't use must in the past. The past of must is had to, We had to wait 2 hours. We had to wait 2 hours at security and nearly missed our flight. Number six. Had you to do a lot of homework, or did you have to do a lot of homework when you were at school? Had you to do a lot of homework, or did you have to do a lot of homework? Which one is correct? Had you to? No. Obviously, if that one's wrong, you cannot say had you to. Remember, the past question is a question in the past about an obligation. We have to use have to because you can't use must in the past. So we need to use have to, past question, with the auxiliary did. Did you have to? Did you have to do a lot of homework? Did you have to do a lot of homework when you were at school? When you were at school is telling us that it's in the past. When you were at school is in the past. So the correct answer is, did you have to do a lot of homework when you were at school? Good. Number seven. I think people who live in flats mustn't have dogs or shouldn't have dogs. Flats is British English. In American English, it's apartment. And Rene has the correct answer. Here it's my opinion. So we're using shouldn't. We don't want to use, we can't say mustn't, because here it says I think. It says I think, so it's an opinion. So if it says people who live in flats mustn't have dogs, that means it's prohibited. Obviously that's not the case, because some people who live in flats do have dogs. So the correct answer is I think people who live in flats shouldn't have dogs. Another way of saying that would be to say I don't think people who live in flats should have dogs. That's probably the way I would say it. Put the first bit negative and say I don't think people who live in flats should have dogs. Here I'm saying the same thing, but in this one here I put the I think positive, and here is I don't think, and here this is negative and this is positive. It means the same thing. Number 8. She's allergic to dairy products, so she mustn't or doesn't have to eat anything made from milk. I think Rene Kanya already has the answer. She's allergic to dairy products, so she mustn't eat anything made from milk is the correct answer. Because if you say doesn't have to, means it's not necessary, but she can if she wants. But that's obviously not what we want to say. She's allergic, so we need to say she mustn't. It's prohibited for her to eat anything made from milk. Things made from milk are called dairy products. Dairy products is anything made from milk. Milk, obviously cheese, butter, cream, yogurt, they are all dairy products. Good, very good. So let's see, we've still got a bit of time left, so we can do some more questions. Let's just move this over here and look at the other questions that we have here. Complete the second sentence. Let's just get that in the right place. A little bit there. Complete the second sentence with 2 or 3 words so it means the same as the first. For example, smoking is prohibited here. We can say the same thing using the modal verb must. You mustn't smoke here. Number 1 is a recommendation. It isn't a good idea to go swimming after a big meal. It isn't a good idea to go swimming after a big meal. Can anybody tell me how I can say the same thing using some of the language we've seen today? And Rennie Kanya already has the answer. Yeah, the answer is you shouldn't. You shouldn't. You shouldn't go swimming after a big meal. Actually, shouldn't go, yeah. You shouldn't go swimming after a big meal. Let's make that a bit smaller and make it red. Shouldn't go swimming after a big meal. Okay, number 2. Was it necessary to pay cash? Was it necessary for them to pay cash? Was it necessary for them to pay cash? Yeah, and Rene already has more or less a correct answer, but he has one mistake in his answer. He has a mistake in his answer because here the subject is them. Third person plural. So the correct answer is, who can say, Rene is one. Did you have? No. What's the correct answer? Can anybody give me the correct answer? Yeah, but you also did them. No, you need to use the subject pronoun of them. They. Yeah, did they? The correct answer is, did they have to pay? We've already got the other bit there. So, did they have to pay cash? Did they have to pay cash? Did they have to pay cash? This is the correct answer. Did they have to pay cash? Here in the original statement we have the it was necessary for them. This is the object pronoun, third person plural. Here we need to use the subject pronoun, third person plural. Let's just move that up a bit. Good. The next one, the meeting isn't obligatory. The meeting isn't obligatory. The meeting isn't obligatory. How can you say the same thing? You go to the meeting. Don't have to. Very good. You put a C instead of a V, but that's okay because on the keyboard, yeah, V and C are next to each other. You don't have to go to the meeting. You don't have to go to the meeting. Let's put that in there. We're going to make it smaller so it fits in. You don't have to go to the meeting. It's not necessary. It's not obligatory. Next one. It's bad manners to talk loudly on a mobile on a train. Mobile here means cell phone in American English. In the United Kingdom they say mobile phone. It's bad manners. So this is like a suggestion, like advice, like an opinion. People, who can give me the answer to this one? Should be, well, is with should, but it's not should be. It's should plus People. People. Has anyone got the answer? Has anybody got the answer? People should talk. People should talk quietly on their mobile, on a train, using should. People should talk quietly. People should talk quietly. And finally, the last question, and just in time because we got 3 minutes to finish the class. Lorries. Lorry is a word we saw in the last class. A lorry is a large vehicle, road transport vehicle. In British English, in American English, it's called a truck or a trailer. Lorries are not allowed to go on this road. Lorries are not allowed to go on this road. Who can say the same thing using one of the words that we saw today? Lorries have to. No, that's the opposite. That means that they're obligated to go on there. We don't want to say that. Have not go. No, 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 no. No, come on. The negative if have to is don't have to, and it's not prohibition, remember. It's shouldn't. No, they're not permitted. Lorries are not permitted. Must. No. Has anybody got the right answer to this last question? Prohibition. How do we talk about prohibition in English? How do we talk about prohibition in English? What do we need to say? Has anybody got the right answer? We got 2 minutes to get the right answer to the last question. Has anybody got the right answer? It doesn't look like it. So, yeah, but are prohibit? No. Anybody don't have to? No, don't have to means it's not necessary. I don't want not necessary. I want prohibition. They cannot. They are not permitted. Who's been paying attention to this class? Let's go back. How do we talk about prohibition? Here, prohibition. Look, prohibition. Prohibition. Must not. At last, Harold. Harold has the correct answer. Lorries mustn't go on this road. Prohibition. Mustn't. Mustn't go. And just in time to finish the class, I think I gotta get this here. Let's put that up there. And just in the nick of time, we say in English, time to finish the class. Thank you very much for watching. Hope to see you next week. Have a nice day.